and good evening. Well, I am going to read this book, but I just want to have a little preamble about something that's been gnawing on the edges of my mind, and tonight's chapter actually triggered me. I'm pretty sure it's going to trigger the reader, especially since subject matter of it. I come to realize that, the social engineering has changed. You know, the brainwashing program that the viewers of this time hearing this story is not the same social programming as what I grew up with, which is these books here. These books came out, the entire series was finished by 1975. And this book is hailed as beloved, which means a very, very, very popular children's books, which means that the programming inside of this book went to many, 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 many minds. In fact, you'll find overtones that are in this book carried over in such movies like The Sandlot. Not to get too far away, this is just a slight preview of the kinds of things I'm going to talk about in the next coffee time, which is not going to be on Monday and Tuesday, but it's going to be on Wednesday and Thursday, as if I have viewers. But for the sake of you, I'll pretend that you're a viewer, because you might be someday. Okay. So, like I said, with the chapter on the diseases, oh my gosh, I'm reading, according to today's brainwashing, I'm reading horror story. The fighting chapter, again, according to today's brainwashing, I'm reading a horror story here. Fine, this is cool. We will break these things down. I will do a book report, analysis, spiritualized book report. Anyway, so we do have a lot of topics to discuss during coffee time this week. I just wanted to give you a little, hope you like it. Okay. Chapter 6. A Wreath for Abe. August came to Aidenville, bringing with it the hottest weather of the year. The heat slowed everybody down. People walked a little slower. Our fathers began crowding us kids at the swimming hole to escape from the heat. Dogs became listless. My dog, Brownie, spent most of his time laying in the shade of a tree under our back porch. I began to worry about Lady, who was expecting a litter of puppies. Tom told me that it would take 62 days from the day Lady mated with Brownie before the pups would be born. He assured me that the heat wouldn't stop Lady from having the litter. As always, the great brain was right. Lady gave birth to a litter of 8 beautiful puppies the second week in August. I took Tom's advice and decided to wait until 3 weeks after the puppies were weaned before taking my pick of the litter. They'll be bigger then, Tom had told me, and not dependent on their mother, so I can judge them better. During the 3rd week in August, Abe Glassman fainted in front of the livery stable. He was carried inside by Mr. Tanner and some other men who revived him. Everybody blamed it on the heat. Abe had earned himself a reputation of being a miser since opening his variety store. It began when he removed the strongbox from his peddler's wagon and placed it in the living quarters of his store. It was a box made of wood and with steel bands around it, and had a big padlock on it. I guess Abe needed the strongbox when he was traveling around in the outlying country, and didn't get near a bank only once or twice a year. Everybody who had seen Abe carrying the strongbox into his store had wondered what was in it. It was just a couple weeks after Abie opened the store that a rumor got around town that the strongbox was filled with gold pieces. A man named Milton Tedford, who worked on the railroad as a brakeman, started the rumor. He made a purchase in the store and had given Abie a $20 gold piece. He told his friends that Abe had gone into the living quarters to make change out of the strongbox. Abe had given Tedford a $10, a $5, and a $2.50 gold piece in change. As the story was repeated around town, people became convinced that the strong box was filled with gold pieces. Uncle Mark was worried about the rumor. He told Abe that there are always drifters in town who might hear about the strong box and attempt to rob it. He tried to persuade Abe to put the money in the bank. Abe told Uncle Mark there was nothing to worry about. Howard K. was the first one to tell me Abe had a strong box filled with gold pieces. He had heard his father telling his mother about it. I had run all the way home to tell Tom about it. Later, when I learned Abie had failed to take Uncle Mark's advice and put the money in the bank, I asked Tom why Abe wouldn't. "What money?" Tom asked as we sat on the back porch steps, waiting until it was lunchtime. "That strong box, full of gold pieces," I said. "If anybody tries to rob Abie," he said, "he's going to be mighty disappointed." "How do you know?" I asked. "I just know, J.D., that's all," Tom said, and I knew from the way he said it that he wasn't going to tell me any more. Mama had tried to buy everything she could from Abie after he opened his store. When she sent me to the store on an errand, she always told me to try the variety store first. If Mama only wanted a small item like a spool of thread, I always went to the variety store. But when she wanted several items, I always went to the ZCMI store because I knew Mr. Harmon would give me a stick of peppermint candy for free. There were never any customers in Abie's store. When I did go there, I began to think that Papa made a big mistake in talking Abie into opening a store in town. I'd hoped that people were right and Abie did have a strong box full of gold pieces, because he sure wasn't doing much business. The second time Abie fainted was just 6 days after the first time. He fainted in front of the post office. Uncle Mark saw it happen. When he revived Abie, he wanted to take the old man to see Dr. Leroy. "The doctor can't help me," Abie told Uncle Mark. During supper that evening, Papa and Mama were talking about it. "I don't understand what Abe meant," Papa said, "unless he meant he has some kind of incurable disease." "Dear God, I hope not," Mama said. The third time Abie fainted was just a few days before school started. It happened right before my eyes. Mama had sent me to get her a package of needles. I knew Mr. Harmon wouldn't give me any free candy for such a small purchase. I went to the variety store. "How are your good father and wonderful mother, John?" Abe asked me as he got the package of needles. "Just fine, thank you," I said. Abe laid the package of needles on the counter, then suddenly pressed his hands to the side of his head. I became terrified as I watched his eyes roll crazily around and saw him fall to the floor. I ran screaming out of the store and didn't stop till I reached the marshal's office. By the time I returned to the store with Uncle Mark, some people who had seen me running screaming out of the store had revived Abe. He was sitting in a chair. Again, Uncle Mark tried to get Abe to see Dr. Leroy. Again, Abe refused to see the doctor. I told Mama about it when I got home. "We must see a doctor," Mama said when I finished, "even if he has some incurable disease, as your father suspects. At least Dr. Leroy can give him something for the pain. I'll get your father to invite Abe for Sunday dinner. That will give your father and me a chance to persuade Abe he must see a doctor." Papa stopped at the store the next morning to invite Abe for Sunday dinner. There was a closed sign on the door. "I thought he might be so ill that he closed up the store," Papa told Mama when he came home for lunch. "So I went around in the back and pounded on the rear door." There was no answer. The only explanation I can think of is that Abe went to Salt Lake City to see a specialist, or to order some new merchandise for his store. Mama sent me to the variety store 3 days later to get a package of carpet tacks. The closed sign was still on the door. I went to the ZCMI store to get the tacks. When I told Mama about it, she got real upset. She telephoned Papa and Uncle Mark to come to our house at once. I went to tell Tom and Swin, who were cleaning the parlor rug. They had it hung on the clotheslines and were beating it with broom handles. They were covered with dust, but that didn't stop them from following me into the parlor where Mama was waiting with Aunt Bertha. Papa and Uncle Mark arrived a moment later. Nobody sat down as Mama looked at Uncle Mark. "Did you see Abe leave on a train for Salt Lake?" she asked. "No," Uncle Mark replied. "I usually meet all trains, but that was the day I had to ride out to the Gunderson ranch. Pete Gunderson thought some of his steer had been rustled. Well, we found them after an all-day search in a gully." "Did anybody see Abe leave?" Mama asked, and her face was now strained with worry. "Come to think of it," Papa said, "nobody has mentioned seeing him leave. And it is strange he didn't tell me, so that I could put an item about it in the Advocate." "How do we know he did leave?" Mama asked. "I see what you're getting at," Uncle Mark said quickly. "There have been quite a few drifters in town lately. One of them might have heard about the strongbox. Putting a close sign on the door would just be a cover-up to give the robber time for a getaway. Let's go." All of us except Aunt Bertha ran all the way to the variety store. Uncle Mark took the butt of his Colt .45 and knocked out a pane of glass in the front door. He reached through the opening and pulled back the barrel bolt lock. "Locked from the inside," he said with a worried look. We found Abe laying on his cot in the living quarters of the store. He was holding a Jewish prayer book in his hands, which were clasped on his chest. He was fully dressed, including his Jewish skull cap. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing. "Thank God it wasn't robbery," Papa said. "He's just sick." "Take him to my house," Mama said briskly. "I'm afraid to move him until Dr. Leroy looks him over," Uncle Mark said. He turned to Swin. Run and get the doctor, Swin." So many people had crowded into the store and living quarters by the time Swin returned with Dr. Leroy that they had to push their way through the crowd. Dr. Leroy ordered everybody out of the living quarters except Uncle Mark. He put the curtains across the doorway to the store so we couldn't see. He and Uncle Mark remained there for what seemed a long time before coming out. Finally, Dr. Leroy pushed aside the curtains and came into the store. His eyes were wide and his mouth twisted as if he were in pain. "Abe is dying of malnutrition," he said in a hoarse whisper. I grabbed Tom's arm. "What's malnutrition?" I whispered. "Hunger," Tom answered. "Abe is starving to death." "Can he be moved?" Mama asked as tears came to her eyes. "He must be. He needs immediate care and nursing, but I'm afraid—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Bring him home with me," Mama said. Uncle Mark wrapped Abe in a blanket and picked the sick man up in his arms. "He's light as a feather, just skin and bones," Mark said, his voice choking. Uncle Mark carried Abe down Main Street to our house, with a crowd of people following. Mama told him to put Abe in her bedroom. She ordered Aunt Bertha to prepare some broth immediately. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, bathing Abe's face with a wet cloth. When Aunt Bertha brought the hot broth, Mama tried to spoon-feed it to Abe. He spat it out on the bed. Then Dr. Leroy tried to force the broth down Abe's throat. Abe threw it up. "I'm afraid we're too late," Dr. Leroy said sadly. Mama cradled Abe's head in her arms. He closed his eyes slowly. A flicker of recognition. He opened his eyes slowly. Sorry about that. A flicker of recognition came into them as he looked at Mama. His lips moved, but no words came. Then he died in Mama's arms. Mama lay his head gently on the pillow. Dr. Leroy closed Abe's eyelids. Mom pulled the sheet up over Abe's head. Then Mama walked slowly into our parlor, which was filled with people. She looked as if she had just lost one of her own loved ones. "Abe is dead," she said as tears toppled down her cheeks. 3 times he fell carrying his cross, just as Christ did, and we were too blind to see. May God have mercy on us. Every business in town was closed the day we buried Abe. Every man, woman, and child able to walk followed the pine coffin to the cemetery. We stood there shamefaced, an entire town, as Reverend Holcomb of the community church looked helplessly across the grave at Bishop Aiden of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. Read the Christian burial service over him, the Mormon bishop said as the wind from a threatening cloudburst made his white beard weave back and forth. I'm sure both God and Abe would understand. We buried Abe with Reverend Holcomb reading the Christian burial service as thunder roared and the streaks of lightning stabbed like swords of fire through the sky. The rain broke as the first shovelful of dirt was placed on the pine coffin. Then the cloudburst came, and rain came pouring down as if dumped from giant buckets in the sky. Not a man, a woman, or a child left the cemetery until the last shovelful of dirt had been placed on the grave, and a big wreath was made by all the ladies of the community, and the Mormon churches placed upon it. I guess we all stood there praying that the rain would wash away some of the guilt from us. Uncle Mark and his wife, my Aunt Cathy, accompanied the family and Aunt Bertha back to our house from the cemetery. We removed our wet coats and hats in the side hallway, and then we all went into the parlor. Everybody sat down as if exhausted, except Uncle Mark and us 3 boys. If I had only known, Mark said, but I had no idea. I thought Abe was doing all right. Calvin Whitlock told me Abe was paying his rent right on the dot, and I heard so much about that strongbox being filled with gold that I believed it until I opened the box and found it empty. It wasn't empty, Mama said. It contains a man's most precious possession. I don't understand what you mean, Tina, Uncle Mark said, as he leaned against the mantelpiece of the fireplace. What Tina means, Papa said, is that the strongbox was a symbol of Abe's pride. To have opened it and let everybody know it was empty would have meant having charity forced upon him. Abe chose to die with Jewish dignity instead of live in the humiliation of charity. It would never have happened if he wasn't a Jew. Nonsense, Mark said. There isn't a man, woman in this town who would hold that against a person. You don't understand what I mean, Papa said. We have cowboys who are out of work, coming into this town all the time, and they are broke. But they know they can live on the free lunches in the saloons and sleep in the livery stable until they find work. And then, when they do find work and have money, they will come into town and spend money in those saloons and stable their horses in that livery stable. Abe didn't drink. He knew he would never spend any money in the saloon, and his pride wouldn't let him go to eat a free lunch, even when he knew he was starving to death. Well, what has that got to do with letting Abe starve to death because he was a Jew? Mark demanded. Abe was my friend, and your friend, and had all kinds of friends. He knew. All he had to do was ask, and we would have given him anything he wanted. But he would have had to ask, Papa said. I just don't get what you're driving at, Uncle Mark said, shaking his head. Well, let me put it this way, Papa said. It isn't that we dislike the Jews or mean to be unkind to them. It's just that we don't worry about them the way we worry about other people. I talked to Mr. Thompson at the meat market. He knew Abe had stopped buying meat from him weeks ago, but he didn't worry about it. I talked to Mr. Harmon at the CCMI store. He knew Abe stopped buying groceries from him, but he didn't worry about it. Oh, they had their excuses, saying they had thought Abe had stopped batching, had stopped batching, whatever that means, and was eating cafes. But the fact remains, we let a man starve to death because nobody worried about a Jew. Oh, I don't buy that, Mark said. Well, let's assume, Papa said patiently, that Dave Teller, who is a bachelor and cooks all his own meals, suddenly stopped buying meat from Mr. Thompson. You can bet Mr. Thompson would have made it his business to find out why. And let us assume that Dave Teller suddenly stopped buying groceries from the ZCMI store. You can bet Mr. Harmon would have worried enough about it to find out why. And let us assume they found Dave Teller was broke. You can bet they wouldn't have let Dave Teller starve to death. And if Dave Teller had fainted 3 times, you can bet the people of this town would have insisted on taking Dave to a doctor, whether he wanted to go or not. But Abe was a Jew, and so nobody worried about him. May God forgive us all. I see what you're getting at now, Mark said. We are all guilty. Mama nodded her head as she brushed a tear from her eye with her handkerchief. God give us strength, she said softly, to bear the burden of our guilt. 2 days after the funeral, Mama sent me to the ZCMI store to get several items for her. Mr. Harmon, as usual, gave me a stick of peppermint candy. I came out of the store holding the bag of groceries in one hand while I put the stick of candy into my mouth with the other hand. I took a bite of the candy. It burned in my mouth, and it stuck in my throat. I tried to swallow it, but couldn't. I spat it out. I threw the candy away, and I've never been able to eat peppermint candy since. Tom was sitting on the rail of the corral fence when I got home. I climbed up and sat down beside him, told him about the peppermint candy. It's your guilty conscience, J.D., he said when I finished. You helped kill Abie. I thought of all the times Mama has sent me to the store when I should have stopped at the variety store instead of going to the ZCMI store. Pardon me. How was I to know that the strongbox wasn't full of gold pieces? I defended myself. You're just saying that as an excuse like most people in town, Tom said. Maybe I should have told. Told what? I asked. You didn't think my great brain would let me rest until I knew what was in that strongbox, did you? He asked. I have known there were no gold pieces in that box for a long time. How did you find out? I asked. I went to see Abe and told him I overheard 2 drifters planning to rob him and that strongbox, Tom answered. You lied? I accused him. Well, how else could I find out? Tom said. At first, Abe just laughed. He stopped laughing when I threatened to call Papa and Uncle Mark so that they could make him put that gold in the bank before he got robbed. Then he began to cry. To cry? I asked, bewildered. Yeah, Tom said. Then he opened the strongbox and showed me it was empty. He told me it had taken every cent he owned to open the store. Then he made me put my hand on a prayer book and swear that I would never tell. He said as long as people thought he had a strongbox full of gold pieces, he could remain in Aidenville. He said he would have to leave if people found out the strongbox was empty. What did he mean? I asked. I thought he meant if people thought he was rich, they would respect him more, Tom said. But I was wrong. It was like Papa said. Abe would rather die than take charity. I'd hate to have it on my conscience that I let a man starve to death, I couldn't help saying. It wasn't me who let Abe starve to death, Tom said. I knew there was no gold in the strongbox, but that only meant Abe wasn't rich. Wasn't a rich man to me. When Mama sent me to the store, I always went to the variety store first. Many times when Abie didn't have exactly what Mama wanted, I went all the way back home to ask her if she couldn't use something else that Abie had suggested. No, J.D., it wasn't me who let Abe starve to death. It was people like you. But you will get all the blame, I said, when people find out you knew the strongbox was empty all the time. The people who didn't buy from Abie and didn't worry about him would love to have somebody to blame for his death, Tom said. But they're going to have to live with their guilty conscience, because I'm never going to tell, and neither are you. Give me your word, J.D. You will never tell. Not even Mama and Papa? I asked. Not even Mama and Papa, Tom said. But you told me, I protested. I had to tell somebody, J.D., Tom said. I knew I could trust you. And I gave my word, and kept it, until now. Like I said, people, we were going to dig in and deconstruct a lot of things over the course of my next free days. Anyway, love you. I hope you enjoy.